What's up, everyone? It's the Football Therapist here to talk about our Week 6 fantasy start and sits. So, as always, a bit of transparency on our previous week. For quarterbacks, we had 28 designated starts and sits. We hit on 19 for 68%. Running backs, we had 50 designated starts and sit. We hit on 41 of those for 82%, which is just excellent. Very proud of that. Wide receivers, we had 68 designated as start or sit. We hit on 42 for 62%. And tight ends, we hit on 19 out of 32 designated start and sit for 59%, which we need to improve our tight ends. It's been very difficult with that position as always, but we will continue to improve, and we hope you all did well last week. Some of our bigger hits: Bridgewater, DJ Moore, Devontae Freeman, Hollywood Brown, Kirk and Jonnu. Christian Kirk and Jonnu. Some of our bigger misses: Justin Jefferson, Tyler Boyd, Deontay Johnson got hurt. Derek Carr, we had him at a sit. He balled out. Hayden Hurst has done nothing when we start him. Just like Mike Gesicki there, whenever we sit him, he plays well. When we start him, he doesn't play well. We also missed on David Montgomery, who had a very good performance through the air. Some quarterbacks to start this week. Jared Goff has been averaging 25.2 fantasy points on the road. San Francisco just got torched last week by Miami. Their secondary is depleted, so I'm expecting a big week for Jared Goff. Atlanta, they give up the most points to quarterbacks. Cousins, he hasn't looked spectacular. He's only averaging 13.5 fantasy points per game, yet with Cook possibly out, I expect a little bit more passing, and they should have some success against this Atlanta defense. Now, Matthew Stafford and Gardner Minshew, they're both starts for me this week. Detroit and Jacksonville give up an average of 21 and 22 points per game to quarterbacks. With Golladay back, Stafford has put up 18-plus points each of the last 2 weeks. Minshew, he's thrown over 300 yards 3 times. I expect a high-scoring game, so I definitely would consider starting both. The only thing is monitor DJ Chark's injury. That could have an impact on Gardner Minshew. Ryan Tannehill, he has a decent matchup. Houston gives up 18 points per game to quarterbacks. He just had a terrific game this past Tuesday night, putting up 4 touchdowns. I expect a high-scoring match, and I think that Tennessee and Ryan Tannehill will have a great day. And Ryan Fitzpatrick is definitely a must-start. He's been on fire, putting up 21-plus points each of the last few weeks. He gets a Jets defense that is struggling. This team is looking like they're tanking. I expect a huge week for Ryan Fitzpatrick, at least 20-plus fantasy points, so start him. Here are some quarterbacks to sit this week. Baker Mayfield, he has a ceiling right now of about 15 fantasy points. I don't really trust him. Yes, it's a decent matchup, but Odell and Landry have been throwing the touchdowns. They run the ball a lot, so I just don't trust them this week, especially since we haven't seen that high ceiling. Nick Foles and Teddy Bridgewater are both sits for me. Carolina and Chicago both are top 3 against quarterbacks for fantasy. Foles has looked okay, but he's missed some passes. Bridgewater has been terrific, but the matchup just isn't good for me. I expect a low-scoring matchup in this one, so I would be sitting them both. Daniel Jones, just don't start him. He's not good this year. Jimmy G, he's banged up. If he plays, I don't really trust the matchup, as the Rams are only giving up 17.2 points per game to quarterbacks, so I would sit him. And then Joe Burrow definitely is a sit for me this week. Indy has been spectacular against opposing quarterbacks. They give up only 12.5 points per game. Burrow just got destroyed by a solid Baltimore defense. I expect a similar type of game, and I just would not trust him this week. Some running backs to start this week. Myles Gaskin is a start for me. The Jets give up 24.9 points per game to running backs. Gaskin saw 21 touches last week. I expect similar numbers and a positive game script. He's definitely a start for me. Mike Davis, you got to start him. He saw 25 touches last week. He's en route to RB1 numbers so far, if he kept this pace up. Obviously, CMC is returning soon. Chicago does give up only 17.8 points per game to running backs, but they are much better against receivers, so I expect a big day, especially in the passing game, for Mike Davis. Gibson, he saw 16 touches last week. The Giants have given up 21 points per game to running backs. I expect him to get quality work, and it should be a positive game script for this team, so I will start him this week. Green Bay, they've given up the second most points to running backs at 27.8. Rojo, he saw 20 touches last week, and he looked very efficient. I think that he could be the guy that we've all been hoping for, so I would start him this week. Edmonds is another guy I'd start. He's been getting a ton of work in the passing game. 5 catches each of the last 2 weeks. Dallas, they give up a ton of points. I expect a lot of passing, and I expect a lot of Chase Edmonds this week. And lastly, if Dalvin Cook is out, which it's looking like he will be, Madison is a must start. Atlanta gives up 20.7 points per game to running backs. He could be used like a workhorse. He was super efficient last week. He had 20 rushes, 18 routes run, so I would start him with high RB2 upside and potentially RB1 numbers. Here's some running backs I'll be sitting this week. There's a lot of talk about Akers getting more touches. I just don't see it yet. He had 9 touches last week, and San Francisco is only giving up 13 points per game to running backs. I still expect a big split, so I would not start Akers just yet. James White, he hasn't played much in the past month. Damian Harris looked really good against the Chiefs. I don't really want to start him against Denver, as they're only giving up 12.1 points per game to running backs, so I will wait to start James White and sit him this week. Same with Melvin Gordon. He's a sit for me. Obviously, there's the off-field stuff going on, but the Patriots only give up 15.3 points per game to opposing running backs. I think that Lindsey will be returning. He'll be stealing touches, so I just wouldn't start Gordon if I didn't have to this week. Wayne Gallman, another guy. He had his moments, but this is now Freeman's backfield. He was out-touched 19-7 last week. There's not enough there for me to feel confident in starting him, so he's definitely a sit. Zach Moss, another guy. He's been hurt. He's been banged up. A lot of people were high on him. Potentially he returns. Potentially he doesn't. He needs to shake off that rust. I still need Singletary in a big game here to get the bulk of the touches. And lastly, Leonard Fournette. He was kind of used as an emergency back last week. He didn't get utilized at all, but he should be coming back from an injury. It's a tough spot for me, starting a guy who's been hurt, coming on, and playing a Green Bay team coming off the bye. So I would personally sit him here and wait to see what Ronald Jones does this week. Here are some wide receivers I'll be looking to start. Mecole Hardman, he has a great opportunity this week. Sammy Watkins is out. He's had 2 touchdowns in the last 3 games. I see the big play potential. I potentially see him getting 2 or 3 big plays this week against a Bill team that's coming off a struggling loss. So I would start him this week and hope that they could pass a ton against the Bills. Christian Kirk, another big start for me. He has a huge opportunity going against a Dallas secondary that stinks. He had 7 targets last week. I expect a ton of targets and a big performance against a weaker defense. Shenault, he's looked really good recently. He got a season-high 8 targets last week. He's going up against a weaker Detroit secondary, giving up 27.7 points per game. Chark may be out, so that definitely means the targets will be going his way. I would start him. Gage, he had 5 targets last week. It was a tough matchup. The Falcons just looked horrendous. This week they get Minnesota, though. They give up 30.2 points per game to wide receivers. If Julio Jones is out, you got to start Russell Gage. I think he gets more targets and will have a great day. Chase Claypool, another guy, you got to monitor the injury reports. Deontay Johnson, he got injured. If he is in, he could capitalize again. He had 11 targets last week, broke out big time. And this Cleveland secondary, they're banged up. They give up 31 points per game to wide receivers. So if he's starting over Johnson this week, you got to start him in your fantasy lineups. And lastly, I'm going to be looking to start Deebo Samuel. So last week, Deebo had 8 targets. They got him some touches in space. This is a must-win game for this team. I know it's a difficult matchup, but for me, He's going to get the touches. He's going to get the targets. They're going to have to utilize him a ton if they want to win this game. Hopefully Jimmy G is healthy and he can really have a big performance if he gets utilized a ton. So I'll be starting Deebo Samuel this week in hopes that he could keep up his target numbers. Here are some wide receivers to sit this week. Scotty Miller, he had his run, but rookie Tyler Johnson really outplayed him last week. He saw 6 targets compared to Miller's 0. I just don't trust him in this matchup, especially if he's not being utilized. Jeff Smith, he saw 11 targets last week, but he had little production. I don't trust him against a solid Miami team who just crushed San Francisco. Yes, he's getting the targets, but with Joe Flacco, I just can't trust him. Marvin Jones, he's only seen 5 targets since Kenny Golladay has returned. I don't trust the volume right now. I expect Amendola to get a little bit more work. So for me personally, Marvin Jones is the sit as I just can't trust him. Darius Slayton, he balled out last week, but Washington has given up only 18 points per game to wide receivers. I don't trust this offense this week in what could be a low-scoring matchup, so I will sit Darius Slayton. I'll also sit Tyler Boyd. He saw only 6 targets last week. T. Higgins is getting the bulk of the targets. The offense struggled against a very good Baltimore defense. The Indianapolis defense is better than Baltimore's this year statistically, so I personally cannot start Boyd. I will be sitting him. And lastly, DJ Moore produced last week, but he only saw 5 targets compared to Robbie Anderson's 13. That's just not good enough. Chicago has given up only 17.2 points per game to wide receivers. I don't like this matchup, hence I will be sitting him this week. Here are some tight ends to start this week. Austin Hooper, he saw 7 and 10 targets in the past 2 weeks. It's a bit of a tough matchup. Pittsburgh has only given up 5.7 points per game to tight ends, but the volume is there, and I expected they will have to throw a little bit more this week, so I would feel comfortable starting Hooper. Eric Ebron in that game is also a start for me. Cleveland has given up 11 points per game to tight ends. Ebron, he's averaged 5 targets per game. He's been getting a little bit more action here and there. I expect a quality performance. TJ Hockenson is a start for me this week. Jacksonville, they've given up 11.8 points per game to tight ends. Coming off a bye week, I expect Hockenson to be used more frequently. Patricia's job is on the line. He needs to start utilizing this guy, so I will start him this week. Mike Gesicki, he's also a start for me. He saw 6 targets last week, had a huge performance. Now again, whenever I start Gesicki, he does bad. When I sit him, he does great. I put that disclaimer in, but he's going up against the Jets, so I got to start him this week. And lastly, Robert Tonyan, he's a big start for me this week. Tampa Bay has given up 7.8 points per game to tight ends. He's been on fire. He saw 5 and 6 targets before the bye. Yes, Adams should be coming back, and that will take some targets away, but I don't think it'll take enough away to where we can't see him getting a touchdown this game. Having Adams on the field should draw the attention of the defense, and I expect Tonyan to be used as that second or third receiving option, which is very good in a pass-happy attack like Green Bay. Here are some tight ends to sit. San Francisco, they've only given up 5.6 points per game to tight ends. Gesicki played well against them last week, but Higbee just is not getting the consistent targets. He had only 2 targets last week. I just don't trust him on a weekly basis. Schultz, he's also a sit for me this week. He's been solid, but I don't really know what Dalton's impact will be on him. He only had 3 targets last week. I don't really trust him in this matchup. Mo Alley-Cox, I don't want to start him this week. The Colts are just so inconsistent with passing. Trey Burton actually is seeing a ton of targets. He had 6 targets last week compared to Cox's 1 target, so I'm not going to trust him this week. I'll sit him. Hayden Hurst, he's been a disappointment as well. Had only 2 catches last week. He only has 6 total in the past 3 weeks. I just don't trust this guy, so I'll sit him. And lastly, Gronk, he had 6 targets last week, but he only had 3 catches. Brait also had 6 targets. If Godwin comes back, that'll bring his target share down, so I just don't trust him in this matchup. Here are some of the top defenses to play, whether it be weekly or DFS leagues. Miami going against the Jets, enough said. Washington going up against the Giants, enough said. Indianapolis, they're one of the better all-around defenses. I think they hold the Bengals in check. And the Patriots get Denver. Drew Lock is returning. That makes it a little bit more intriguing. I don't know if Gilmore will be available, but I still expect a big performance from them, especially with the way that they played before the bye, playing up against the Chiefs. They looked very good, so I would definitely start New England this week. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask below. Check out our full start and sit article, and I'll see you guys soon.